I spent one full week at home with the Canon RF 100mm macro, and I have some thoughts. Now, the macro lens in itself has been kind of typecast as being for bugs or flowers or generally just kind of close-ups with nature, whether rightly or wrongly, based on an Instagram search. But in reality, macro lenses are much more than that. They are great for all kinds of close-ups when you're trying to get texture or detail in your photos and videos. And in the spirit of this concept, is this lens worth this price? I figure what better of a way to do that than to spy some really good close-ups of some random objects around the house and play a little game of But really, after all of that, is the RF 100mm macro worth $1,000? Well, if my opinion matters to you at all, I would say yeah, probably, maybe. One of the biggest things for me is versatility. I needed to do more than one thing, even if it's a prime.
Oh, I know that. That's the language of the primes.
It can still work in more than one avenue. And with the ability to stop down to f2.8, this L series lens is one of the most versatile, in my opinion, for macro photography and videography. And for me, the versatility extends beyond just the macro capabilities in the fact that it is a telephoto lens, which allows you to capture things in distance. But speaking specifically on the macro capabilities, I think the RF 100mm macro is actually better than some of the competitors in certain ways. The example I have is the Laowa tube lens. It's an F14, it's a 24mm, I believe, and it's one of the most interesting lenses out there, but it's also, in my opinion, extremely difficult to use because of the base f14. When you have that as your base f-stop, it's extremely hard to get lighting properly, and instead with the f2.8 of the 100mm macro, this makes it much more viable for many more environments. Many more people can use it because you don't have to have a professional lit studio to use it. But of course, no lens is perfect, and for that reason, we need to talk about the autofocus and the SA control feature. As for the autofocus, it is snappy from element to element, foreground to background. This certainly is in part to the 5 stops of internal stabilization in the lens itself, or up to 8 stops in the camera bodies that have IBIS. And photographers, you might notice this less, but those who use lenses for video applications, I found it kind of interesting that it was a little more difficult to capture a focus, especially on subjects while moving the camera directly. This was especially true at the macro focus distances. Of course, one way to combat this is the range limiter on the lens, which will keep you in the ranges that you're actually trying to shoot in, whether that's the macro side or the distance in the telephoto side. But remember, this is macro photography and videography, and beyond just a range limiter, it can be hard to keep an f2.8 focal plane in focus on the thing that you want. Really, the best thing to do with this kind of thing is to bump your f-stops and actually increase your light source. If you can do that, of course. But as far as the SA control, I don't know that it's all that it's cracked up to be. SA control is that spherical aberration control, which will allow you to adjust your bokeh in both your foreground and background elements. Now, I'm no pro with SA control, but from what I tended to notice in my video applications was that when using SA control at the lower f-stops, I tended to see a softer image overall. And this typically isn't something that I would want in my images. I have seen other videos where people have used it at higher f-stops, and it really does shape that foreground or background element. But for me, if I can't use it at the lower f-stops, that's probably not for me, because that's where I tend to shoot a lot of things. But that's just my opinion overall for the SA control, at least with only 1 week's experience with it. Hopefully this has helped you out. Hopefully this will keep you in mind that you don't have to use this with flowers and bugs alone, even if Instagram says you do. Instead, this is something that can be used with all kinds of things to really give you detail. and a lot of texture with your images, which I certainly appreciate. But don't forget, now is the time. If you haven't already, make sure to go down below right here and hit that little subscribe button and the like button, because we're still doing that in 2024. Just in case you forgot, make sure to do that. And while you're down there, check out the links for Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. They're the usual socials I use, so I would love to talk to you guys there as well. Also, just let me know what you're thinking about. Is this lens interesting to you, or would you pick it up, or do you think it might be a little bit too costly? I would love to know all of those things. But for now, I'm going to hit you with my typical peace out, and I will see you guys in the next one.